To today's live stream, we are comparing the Hisense U9N to the Bravia 9. Now, Bravia 9 is, in my opinion, the best mini LED TV you can get this year, although at the shootout we found the Samsung QN95D to be very close, equal in many ways, and the U9N is Hisense's attempt at beating the Bravia 9. Now, the U9N costs the same. The 75-inch U9N is about $3,000 at launch. Now it'll be launching soon, or already, it might have already released, but it's currently $29.99. The 65-inch Bravia 9 is also $29.99, so they're actually very similar in price, but look at the size difference, right? 75-inch versus 65-inch, and the BVM 3110 also for sale, but unfortunately that one's $30,000 with no tuner, so maybe, and it's a bit small, it's 32 inches, right? So we've got three different TV panels you can look at, and today we will do off-angle comparisons since you guys want to see ADS Pro, how does that compare to the Bravia 9? Now, just so you guys know, the U9N has the ADS Pro on all of its two sizes. 75-inch and 85-inch are both ADS Pro. I'm going to stop actually right here. This is already, I can see differences, right? And go there. And the Bravia 9 does not have ADS Pro. It is a VA panel. However, it has a special off-angle coating, which I have found to be the best, bar none, of any LCD TV this year. So if you're slightly off angle and you want to get a mini LED LCD TV, because for whatever reason you don't want to go OLED, then the Bravia 9 has the best off-angle viewing. The question is, how does U9N compare off-angle to the Bravia 9? So we'll do that comparison so you guys can see for yourself what are the pros and cons of ADS Pro and whether it's worth jumping to the Hisense U9N to get that. Now, the reason I stopped here is, if you can see, the brightness on these TVs very well matched, right? Even the colors are very similar, but if you notice, the U9N is slightly color desaturated in the clouds right there on the top left-hand corner, and the Sony Bravia 9 looks more similar to the reference monitor. That's why I have it up, right? So there is a little bit more color there that should be there, and the U9N is just a touch undersaturated. So this goes to the discussion where a few reviewers have already measured the U9N, and they say that on the window measurement, their meters show the U9N to have way better color volume, right? Better color volume than the Bravia 9, and yet in real content, we don't see that. And this is why I have to tell everyone to be careful. The meters will say one thing, but then when you get the content onto the TV, you might not see that. And this is the limitations of measurements and content. When the TV sees content, it may pull back on color saturation, or the brightness may be beyond what that color saturation at that color volume allows, and so it ends up being desaturated, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. And now the question is it because in this scene the U9N is too bright? Let me check the exposure and I'll tell you guys. Nope, the brightness is identical in that top left-hand corner as the Bravia 9. So it's definitely not because of it's being too bright. So this is for whatever reason. And I know Hisense is watching this, so we're going to go on because a lot of these scenes, they end up looking very identical. To me, it's awesome, considering that the U9N is not calibrated out of the box. So if you guys saw my pictures, right, this is literally out of the box. They did not calibrate it at the factory and send it to me. This is what you guys are going to see out of the box. Now, panel variations being what they are, you may not get the same color science I'm getting out of the box, but it's actually very close to the Sony. I'm pretty impressed. Oh, here's another great scene. Actually, I'm going to stop it right here. Okay, so now before we dive into this scene, I think you guys can see that. Let's see any questions you have. Hey, Vinyl Gourmet, what do you mean firmware messed last week? I updated everything seems okay. So not to get you hot and bothered, Vinyl Gourmet, but if you check the owner's forum, you'll see it affects a lot of people, whether it's gaming, local dimming has an issue, in and out of gaming. I know that Classy has called me and told me that the CMS calibration is broken after this firmware update, so he let the team know. I mean, there are a lot of issues that you may not notice if it's not the kind of content you're watching. Some people got locked out of the settings. So in HDR, I think with app streaming, you can't change the settings, it's locked. So Sony knows, right? I spoke to Sony, and Sony will be on our live stream tomorrow. So the whole intent of tomorrow's live stream is not really to talk about the firmware issues on the Bravia 9 and 7, is to talk about how Sony intends to support PS5 Pro, like what are they doing special. But I prepared them just in case you guys show up complaining about your Bravia 9. So they are on it. They have spoken to me. They will have a firmware fix soon enough. So just give you guys an update on the Bravia 9. It's escalated, they know. And so hopefully it gets fixed. Now, back to this scene. So the Bravia 9 and the U9N, if you notice on the Bravia 9, there is a much sharper delineation in that bright highlight right there, just above the mountains, right? Whereas on the U9N, it's kind of blurred. It doesn't feel as sharp. And if I look at the reference monitor, it's identical to the Bravia 9. So phenomenal job by the Bravia 9. And there is a color gradient there that we're not seeing on the U9N, specifically right around where this is. Oh my gosh, it's like a wall of heat here. So right here, there's a lot clearer tone mapping. Excellent job by the Bravia 9. And just like the reference. Now, before we get any further, I should share my settings with you guys so you guys know what we're doing here and what the settings are. So let me turn, I think that's the right exposure for settings. So yeah, let's jump into settings really quick. Should have done that first. Okay, so the Bravia 9 is in its most accurate picture mode. Professional mode, this was the mode that had the calibration. Brightness is set on max, HDR, contrast 90, gradation preferred, of course. And I feel the best performance is auto local dimming on medium. Peak luminance on high. Okay. And on the Hisense, let's make sure you guys can see that. Okay, filmmaker mode I found to be the most accurate, so I'm going to leave it on filmmaker mode. Yes, I turned off all of the ambient sensors and all that crazy stuff. So local dimming I set to high. It gives you the best blacks and contrast. I don't know what this is exactly. Fast backlight control, I left it off. I didn't seem to help anything really. Peak brightness is on high. Now, for some people, if your room is a little dim and it feels too bright, you could always take it down. So I'm going to leave it on high, but you could always bring it down a little bit. See? It's, you know, it takes overall brightness down. Brightness is 100. Contrast, I found default 50, not good. 45, I need more detail. And you see, even at 45, the contrast, I think this is its best relative to the other TVs. Black level, same thing I did at -1. Dark detail is off. Active contrast off. Dynamic tone mapping, okay. I had to leave this on. If I turn it off, you will see in some scenes, not as good, right? Notice the difference here? It's slightly different. It feels more accurate with it on, but you guys can play it to taste. I feel there's more detail with it on. And the irony is, because it's so bright, technically, it doesn't need dynamic tone mapping. But in this case, I think it's not dynamic tone mapping per se, the way we understand it, which is pulling the brightness down and giving it that more aggressive tone curve so that the brightness is down, you get more color. Here, it's capable of over 3,000 nits. It shouldn't be tone mapping. I think what it is more color mapping, because it's with it off, everything is clipped. You need it on. And it shouldn't be clipping, right? There's certain scenes where, oh, it can handle that brightness. Why is it clipping? So that's something that I'm hoping Hisense sees, and I'll send them a notice so that they can play with that. But yeah, just so you see on, off, right? I find on to be more accurate. Local dimming's on high, all right. And color, most accurate color is warm 1. Everything else is default. Dynamic color enhancer is off. Color space is on auto. They do a good job recognizing what it is. Okay. All right, let's check any questions you may have here. Jason, this is a great comment. The U8N looks like a champ for what I am seeing now. Ironically, the U8N has better tone mapping. I don't know how to say this, but it feels like the U9N took the U7N's tone mapping. If you saw my U7N versus QM7 comparison, the U7N's tone mapping issues appear to be shared with the U9N. And I mean, it's not as bad as U7N, so it's definitely not because of lack of dimming zones. I think it's a software tuning thing. They need to look at the U8N and copy that over instead. But as you go through this, you'll see the theme. So let's move on. But this is a great scene. And of course, we're using Jennifer Gala's content. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for making this possible. Hopefully she's here. Oh, here's a great one as well. So like scenes like this look great. Color looks good. They look identical. I can't jump in there and say, oh, look, the Bravia 9 looks better. So this always goes to our discussion. When you hit the very challenging scenes, like I'm just going to pause right here just because this scene is typical of what you're going to see. The blues are there, right? And the reason why the U9N looks like it's missing some of that blue, it's that much brighter. I'm going to have to take the exposure down just a touch because this is such a bright TV. And even then, so it looks very similar to the reference monitor actually. So that's how bright it's supposed to be, right? And this looks great. If I looked at this, I go, oh yeah, U9N, winner. And most of the scenes are kind of like this in a sense that you wouldn't be able to choose based just on these scenes, right? So these are great scenes where they're very similar. Now, one thing I want to emphasize, this U9N feels premium. Wow. If I didn't know it was a Hisense, just looking at the way it's cased, alloy metal casing, where the speaker grill around it. So the Sony, you can't see any speakers because it has the acoustic glass surface. So the Sony speakers is actually the surface, right? Can't find the speakers anywhere. The Hisense U9N, on the other hand, has to have speakers. It's not using any kind of surface movement of the panel, but it's beautifully done. I mean, the side all around, right? There's speakers up, down, and everything. Amazing. Oh, I have to stop here just so I could show you guys. So the detail here is phenomenal. The brightness and everything. I'm going to take the exposure up so you guys can see the differences in brightness. If you can. And the Bravia 9 keeps up right here. I mean, that's a bright TV. And the U9N is not brighter, and it has, sure, tone mapping is great. No complaints. Well, if I was to nitpick, the finest hairs of this space scene, the Bravia 9, it's impressive that I can see it slightly better than the U9N. And considering that Bravia 9 is a smaller TV, and I can see it from this distance, that's actually a pretty good job. So I'm gonna have to give the Bravia 9 a hand clap here. Good job, Sony. The reason why I want to show you this scene is it's a bright scene with shadow detail in the person's jacket. He's wearing pants, it's super bright. And does it lift it because it's so bright? And the answer is no. The shadow detail, the black levels of the U9N spot on matches both the Bravia 9 and the reference monitor. So this is quite an accomplishment. This is Hisense definitely using its dimming zones to its full advantage, whereas Sony is using software. But this is a great scene to compare. It's a difficult scene because it's so bright, and it's really hard to get this right and not screw up the shadow detail. This scene looks phenomenal on both TVs. We're going to have a starfield test for sure, Dave. So watching on an OLED, the Hisense has more and brighter stars than the Sony. So more often than not, they look the same. There are some scenes where the U9N is slightly better, but then there are more scenes where the Bravia 9 has better tone mapping. So it's just something that they're trading blows, but the Bravia 9 is getting more blows in. How about that? YouTube sucks. They're sending me 1440p resolution. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm sending you 1440p resolution. I am sending it through 4K. Yeah, 8K, that'd be great, right? But it's okay. Listen to what I say, buddy. Thank you, Jesus, for showing up. I mean, okay, I'm going to stop here for skin tones because this is a very good scene. And they're so similar, right? So again, don't use YouTube to compare color differences. look at YouTube to see if it's similar, right? Because if it's similar and the same technology, they're both using LCD, and wow, I mean, look at how good the U9N looks like the Bravia 9 out of the box. If I looked at this, I wouldn't say, oh, look, U9N has different color or whatever. It is so similar to the U9N's white point in the scene. Now, there's some scenes where you can say, oh, maybe it's a little different, but it's close enough to a calibrated TV and a calibrated monitor where how far has Hisense come to look so similar to a reference TV? I'm pretty impressed, for sure. So that's something that I just wanted to mention. Good job, Hisense. Keep it up. So scenes like this, right? Travel looks very similar. So I'm going to go to one where I think you guys will enjoy the differences a bit. And we're going to have real content too. We're going to surprise Netflix movie that one of my friends suggested to use for the review, so you guys will see. And again, we're using all Jennifer Gallo material or Netflix later, and we're going to go off angle. Oh, this is a great one to do off angle, I think, because it's got color, it's got shadow detail. One second. Let me see how it looks off angle. Ah, no, there are better scenes. I'll find something better. I think the one in Japan with the kimono is actually pretty impressive. Here we go. Okay, here we go. So this one is a great scene for me to pause. We saw this issue with the G4 against the Z95A, and we're seeing it here with the Hisense. And I'll show you what the issue is in a second. Hoping you guys can see that. Nope, it's still too bright. How about that? Okay, a little bit better. One more. Perfect. Okay, now, you guys see the difference? And just for those of you who have YouTube compression issues, right? There's more color here, very similar to the one on the reference monitor, much less saturation here, right? And this is not super duper bright. Let me turn on my waveform so I can see. Wrong one, maybe it's this one. There we go. So it's only 624 nits, or maybe 650 nits, right? So it's only 650 nits right there. It's not bright. This is why I love this scene. At 650 nits, the question is, why is it desaturated here? Now the Bravia 9 has more saturation. The most saturation is actually on the reference monitor. So yeah, Bravia 9, very good. And there's no reason for the Hisense to be desaturated right there. But off angle, so this is it. Let me answer questions, but this is a great off angle scene for you all though. Michael says, I have the U8N and was shocked at how beautiful the picture was. It's a good picture. It's as close as you're going to get to the Bravia 9. I was going to say the U9N would be the Bravia 9 competitor, but ironically, it's the U8N that makes for a better Bravia 9 competitor. I would call the U8N the poor man's Bravia 9. Indeed, it's a great deal. You can get the 65-inch for $9.99. I mean, geez, 99% of the Bravia 9 for $9.99 all day long. And it's because its shadow detail is closer to the Bravia 9 than the shadow detail on the QM8. So thank you, Michael, for reminding us how great the U8N is. All right, so let's go off angle real quick. You guys are going to love this. All right, I hope I can get it for you guys to see. Okay. All right, let me know if you guys can see this. Wait, there we go. So I'm about, I'd say, 45 degrees, maybe a little bit wider. And let me turn the reference monitor just a touch. All right, let's see what we got here. Oh, perfect. That's the magic of ADS Pro. You guys see the color difference now? So suddenly you go from the right saturation of the Bravia 9 to a little bit desaturated, right? Angle even closer there. And I don't think people realize how good ADS Pro is, and that's why I wanted to do this for you guys. Okay, so the oranges on the Bravia 9, you lose a lot of color. And this is not anything other than this is a VA panel. So I know TCL is releasing a whole new VA panel technology next year called H something something or other, but they make it more wide angle. So to be fair to the Bravia 9, it is the best among LCD TVs. But to see what ADS Pro can do off angle, that's pretty impressive, right? And that's why I'm a fan. Now, in some scenes though, you might notice blooming. So if I turn up the exposure, the blooming is slightly more noticeable, I think, possibly. Let me see if I can. All right, just slightly. Well, maybe not that slightly after all. So in this scene, you can't tell. So congratulations, U9N. This is why I prefer ADS Pro. This is why I thought the Samsung QN90C last year was such a winner. The 90C used ADS Pro. It preserved color saturation. Its contrast was spot on. And this year, it's VA. I mean, it's still good, but you're not going to get the same level of off-angle color saturation that it did last year. And unfortunately, why did Samsung switch? Well, because it's gotten into an argument with BOE, and they decided not to use BOE panels this year. And so, this is where we are. So, that's what it is, folks. So I think that kind of made a point. Color saturation, those of you who think it's exaggerated, nope, indeed, it is a thing. The Bravia 9, on angle, very well saturated. You take it off angle, it all goes away. And that was extreme off angle. So it's not like, oh, I moved my head and it's off. The Bravia 9, again, 20 degrees left to right, you're fine. It's when you start going 30, 40, 45, then ADS Pro becomes a thing. So, all these scenes look great, but again, I don't know why.
Someone's at the front door.
And someone's at the front door. And, again, this is another example of Hisense desaturating its reds a touch. Yeah, you can see right there, very clear. Oh, and my reference monitor is completely off angle now. And what happened to the reference monitor? Why does it look so bad? All right, okay. All right, that should be better. All right, there, now it looks like a reference monitor, right? So even the Bravia 9 doesn't have all the colors of the reference monitor, but it's closer than the U9N. And it's not because U9N is too bright, it's just, it's completely missing. All right. Moving on. I'm hoping that U9N is one software improvement away from being awesome, because everything else about it is pretty great. But that, yeah, the tone mapping weakness is a bit painful to see. So, oh, actually, I'm going to stop right here, 4,000 nits. Okay, let's get to this question real quick. What kind of settings do you have with the tone mapping on 3110? So, great question. The purpose of 3110, there is no tone mapping at all. 3110 hard clips, meaning if it's brighter than what it could handle, doesn't tone map. It's just white, clipped, no detail at all. So as long as it's within its operating parameters of the 3110, I will get all the details that's supposed to be there. So its operating parameters are like at 10% window, it goes up to 5,000 nits. But at a 10% window, if it hits 6,000 nits, guess what? Clipped, no detail at all. So, and how do I know? I have a waveform that tells me which part of the scene exceeds its ability to tone map, or not tone map, its ability to render, because it doesn't tone map. It's a hard clip. And that's why we get the reference monitor. You want to have scenes within its ability to show, because if it can't show it because it's too bright, that means it's too bright. Every TV for sure will be tone mapping. And so the 3110 goes up to 5,000 nits depending on the size of the window. Full screen, 1,000 nits. No TV does that right now. But at a 10% window, up to around 5,000, just above 5,000 nits. So like this scene, 4,000 nits, it could easily handle. And you see it right here, right? So let me see. Turn down exposure a bit more. I want you guys to see that. Okay. Again, the most color is on the 3110. It's able to preserve color saturation at that brightness. It's 4,000 nits right there. And the Bravia 9 comes closer, and the U9N has the least color saturation, but let me see how bright it is. Can it match the brightness? At least give me something, right? And yes, it is brighter than the Bravia 9 by about 3 stops. So yeah, it's a bit brighter than the Bravia 9. So maybe there's some headroom there for it to pull down the brightness just a touch and give me some more color. And why do I say that? Because you're like, FOMO, you're normally like HDR impact guy. What happened? It's because this scene is a long scene, right? So right after the scene, HDR impact, I'm okay with giving up color if it's like Mad Max Fury Road, flash, flash. Well, this scene is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5 seconds of color. I'm going to notice that. If it's like a split second, Mad Max, lightning, flashing, if I lose a little bit of orange in that flash, I'm good. But that scene was 5 seconds of no color. Unfortunately, we're going to notice that. And this is something that manufacturers need to understand, right? HDR impact, well, the word impact means it's like boom. But this is more about color saturation, color accuracy. It's losing it here because this is a long scene. I don't want to lose color saturation when it's more than a second. Under a second, I probably would not notice, but 5 seconds, oh yeah. And so this is a great discussion about HDR impact versus color saturation. At some point, you cross over to the other. And thank you again, Jennifer, for making these videos. I love how she tone mapped like everything, perfect brightness to show tone mapping issues, right? So here we are, the clouds. So I'm going to show you right here in this scene. There is some amazing cloud detail here, right? This part of the scene that I am losing about 50% of that detail there. The brightness is there, the detail is not. And let me see if I can take brightness down a little bit more so you guys can see that. Okay, I think you guys can see that, right? So the clouds are there, but you're losing the subtlety that's in the reference monitor and in the Bravia 9. And so the question is, oh, maybe the Bravia 9 is just too bright, right? Or rather, the U9N is too bright. And indeed, it matches the brightness of the reference monitor right there. And I think that's the issue. It's trying so hard to hit reference brightness that it forgot about rendering the details. And it's so hard for me to call it tone mapping because it's within its headroom. It shouldn't be tone mapping. And I have dynamic tone mapping. Well, and this is a great way to compare dynamic tone mapping for you guys, actually. So let me show you what happens when I turn dynamic tone mapping off. And this is why I had to turn it on. This is that perfect scene for you guys to see that. So and thank you, Hisense, for dropping the menu down so that we can see what it does. All right, so dynamic tone mapping is on. I turn it off, I lose even more detail. Right, you guys see that? On. Yeah, I think you guys see that off. So you guys cannot turn it off. You guys have to leave it on. and this is what I'm talking about. You lose shadow detail, you lose color. I mean, it's clipped. Like, what is this? The color changed completely, right? You see that color shift? Like, what happened here, right? So you got to leave dynamic tone mapping on. On the U8N, I forgot what my recommendation was, but U8N consistently just had better overall consistency. The U9N, you got to leave dynamic tone mapping on, and even when it's on, I'm not getting as much detail as I should for a TV that's capable of this headroom. So, and none of the other settings help. So, just guys, let you guys know. Oh, what is you lower the brightness? I tried everything. I tried local dimming high, local dimming medium. It doesn't matter at all. All right, so what questions you guys got? All right, great question. Stop the FOMO. What HDMI cable do you recommend to connect the UBX800M2 to a 4K TV? Been using Monster 4K cable, so don't waste your money on Monster. The good news is any HDMI cable today is capable of passing movies. 4K HDR, you're good. You don't need anything special. I suggest getting a cable that's thin so that you can manage it easily. Thick cables are just not they're no good, right? Because they're heavy and they will damage your HDMI port because the weight, I mean, those things are delicate. Not many people tell you, if your cable weighs down that port and you keep on plugging it and unplugging over time, it just wears it out. So it's best to use the lightest cable you can find. And good news for you is basic movie watching HDMI cable, get the least expensive one you can find that's thin. And I like Cable Matters. They're very affordable, well made. Cable Matters, Anchor. Now for the longer runs that I use, I only use RUI Pro, RUI-PRO, because they're optical. I love their optical cables. I've been using RUI Pro since I started this channel, right? 2019, and it still works. Like I've had RUI Pro cables since then. I use it to travel when I do my shootouts, coverage. I use optical cable because I'm running 40 feet, 30 feet, right? And for me, they're just so reliable and they're relatively affordable. Thank you again, Jennifer, for making the starfield test possible. I gotta thank Jennifer so that she keeps on making these amazing videos. So far in this scene, it looks great, right? I'm gonna stop here to see how bright do these stars get relative to each other. So coming out of black, they look very similar, right? I have my exposure up. If I turn on exposure, let's see. And the U9N is slightly brighter, right? So you can see once I turn the exposure down, U9N matches the BVM. That's pretty phenomenal starfield test. So good job. So this, I know it's tough engineering TV, so I'm going to take a moment. So Hisense engineers have to work on so many different things, and each one they work on affects something else. I can see that they're working on specular highlights because you guys know I love the little star hat test on The Greatest Showman. And this demonstrates to me that it's going to do very well in that. But look at, it has a bit more clouding than the Bravia 9 though, because there is a cost to this. So I'm going to show you what the cost is. There we go. Oh, even then, lower even further. Okay, let's keep on going. But it's close. However, the Bravia 9 has more black uniformity in those darker star fields. Let me find a dark one for you guys. Oh, here we go. Okay, so right here, the Bravia 9 is a bit blacker, and there's a touch of blooming around the U9N, and on the reference monitor is perfect. No blooming, nothing. And I'm hoping I'm able to capture some of that for you because my camera, it's only an FX30. It doesn't have the extreme dynamic range that I would like for it to have. So I still need to upgrade my camera to capture this better. But I think you can see that on the U9N, there's slight blooming in this scene. Yep, I'm looking on my YouTube and yeah, you can see it. But it's very subtle. But what was the takeaway? The Bravia 9 doesn't get as bright, right? So if I go down a touch, exposure down, you see that the Bravia 9 slightly less bright. So there's that give and take. What Sony did was, look, we don't want that blooming craziness. We can get that bright, but we're going to introduce blooming. We don't think the customer is going to care if we take that brightness down a touch to make sure the black levels are consistent. Whereas the U9N is like, you know what? You guys want pop, you want looking good, starfield, super bright. We'll give it to you, but you're going to have to accept some of that clouding and blooming. So it's interesting because a lot of people say, well, that's maybe because you have on medium, right? So let me take the Bravia 9's local dimming to high, and let's see if we cannot make it a little bit brighter. Medium means that my black levels are uniform. Low, let's see. Oh, even worse. So I gotta keep it at medium. So there you go. The best setting is still medium. So what happened is when I went on high, the blacks got even blacker, which pulled down the specular highlights even more. So this is definitely the best compromise for sure. So yeah, Sony, good choice right there. And I can tell you this, the Samsung will not be as bright. The Samsung is even more aggressive in dimming the specular highlights to get even better blacks. And I think that's a bit too much. But that's why you get OLED, right? They're not intended to compete with OLED here. Ooh, look at that. Oh my goodness. It blows me away. This is super bright. There we go. So you can see the Hisense is actually a bit brighter than the BVM. And why isn't the BVM that bright? So let me see how bright it's supposed to get. It's possible that it's hitting its maximum brightness, right? Oh, wrong one. This one? Nope. This one. Okay, here we go. Ah, it's only 100 nits. So the Hisense is not following the UOTF curve. It's over brightening the scene. So this is just under 1,000 nits, right? And the Hisense is significantly brighter. That tells me that it's not accurate. Now, most of you won't care. This looks great, but just giving you a heads up, this is why people know. This is where calibration comes in. You may be able to fix this in calibration. You may not. It just depends on the TV. But if you do, it will make something else too dark. So oftentimes, that's the issue. But it's not terrible. I mean, slightly brighter. I think most of you will go with that. Oh, that was a great example of good uniformity out of the box. Okay, so let's go over here. Let's see how the black levels are when it's super bright with a black center. So we'll pause right here. Okay, so the black center, how black is it, right? So let me turn off the exposure, you guys can see. And the Bravia 9 is slightly blacker. You guys can see that. And let me turn up the exposure even more. Okay, so as you can see, with the exposure turned up, the Bravia 9 is a touch darker there, just a touch, but I have to use my exposure fully exaggerated for you guys to see that. Actually, they're very close. I would not be able to choose which one's darker without doing this with my exposure. So the Hisense is definitely a bright TV, and it doesn't badly affect how the shadow detail is. And this black, I mean, this is pretty amazing actually. Because normally you would have blooming right here into the center, and it controls it perfectly. Sony, awesome. And the reference monitor is like an OLED. It's just perfectly black in there. So yeah, good job. This is one where I'm going to hand clap for both TVs because they're that good. All right, so this next one by Jennifer Gala, it's less bright. It only goes up to 1400 nits in some content, and in others, it's under 1000. Just depends on the content. And in this content, they look very similar. And this is what most content you're going to see, right? Meaning it's not challenging, it's not crazy. The U9N looks the same. And so this goes to the question, wait, should I get the U8N then? And yes, so basically that's it. The U8N does a better job of tone mapping the color down, giving you good color saturation, excellent shadow detail. And we're going to go into shadow detail after this, but all this additional brightness and headroom that U9N has, it's abusing it. It's not getting you the colors that you need. So what's the point of the extra color? I definitely don't approve of that approach, right? And so U8N this year is, in my opinion, it's best TV. Now the audio system on this U9N is amazing, but that's not why you get the TV. You're looking at the actual image quality, and the image quality feels like whoever engineered the U9N color and tone mapping system, they only worked on the U8N and then let their lackeys work on the U9N, which is very unfortunate. So this is a great one because its color saturation is very similar to the Sony now when it's not as bright. So in less bright content, so this one, how bright does it get? That sun goes up to 1500 nits. So right at the peak of the sun is 1500 and it drops down to under 1000 as you get farther away. So 1500 nits on a 2% window, let's say, right? This Hisense right here, this is its winning shot, is this scene. So maybe they just tone mapped it to this scene, unfortunately. So 1500 nits is its limit of excellent tone mapping, which tells me that maybe the U8N should be the TV to get, because that definitely does well up to 1500 nits as well. So those of you who have the U8N, you definitely got yourself an amazing TV. It is still the poor man's Bravia 9 for $999. I mean, if you complain, I know $999, you're not a poor man. You still got money in the bank, right? So I got it. My other recommendation, and this is the TV that is in the lead this year, is the QM7. I would suggest you get the QM7 before you get the U8N because that's only $700. And if there's something missing from the QM7, like shadow detail, then you jump to the U8N because the U8N definitely has better shadow detail than the QM7. The QM7 is so close to what the QM8 does well for $300 less. I have a really hard time recommending, unless you're jumping to the Bravia 9. I mean, it is a huge leap in terms of that high performance picture level. But if it's Netflix you're watching, the QM7 looks just like the U8N, looks just like the Bravia 9 in Netflix more often than not, which takes us to Netflix. So I'm going to share with you what we're going to see on Netflix. Where's my Netflix button? All right, chaos. Look at the shadow detail on the Bravia 9. So first, Hisense isn't terrible. This is, to be fair, this is what I used to see on the Sony X95K. When the X95K came out, backlight master drive resurrected in 2021, I was so excited. And then I saw its shadow, like, no, that's not a good look for you, Sony, compared to the reference monitor, right? That reference monitor is how the shadow detail should look. Perfect. That's how OLED's going to look, right? Look at the Bravia 9, how close it matches to the reference monitor in that shadow detail. The U9N has the shadow detail, but it's a touch lifted. Why? Because it needs to get bright. So look at how much brighter this is right here. See this brightness? It's trying to match the reference monitor's brightness, right? And that's about, it's not super bright, it's like 500 nits, right? So it's trying to hit this, but it has to lift everything to get there. Sony's like, no, we're okay. And I'll turn down the exposure so you can see how well matched that brightness is. It's too bright. I think the Bravia 9 got it right. So in this case, Hisense didn't even have to get it that bright. Had it got it less bright, the shadow detail maybe would be closer to the Sony, right? And I'm just going to turn up the exposure in because I'm very impressed by what Sony did here. This deserves an applause, and this is why people pay the big bucks for the Sony. People wonder, ask me, oh, should I pay the extra, whatever? You're not going to get this from any mini-LED TV, any. The Q900D comes close. The Samsung Q900D, so let me take it back. Samsung's flagship 8K TV, it will do this level of shadow detail, and that review coming up. But it's expensive, and it doesn't have the specular highlights. That's why I'm not happy with the Q900D. The 900D can do this with the shadow detail, but it will not get as bright on the specular highlights because it's focused so hard on the shadow detail. And the U9N, well, first the U8N looks very similar. So again, U8N will give you this level of shadow detail. That's why I recommend it. But it's not as refined as the U9, as the Bravia 9. So with that in mind, let's see what you guys got to say. The Bravia 9 is wimpy with a starfield, but this sample sure is telling. Yes, this is why it's wimpy with a starfield. But let's let the scene move on a little bit for you guys. Oh, there's another one. Here we go. See this, because there's no bright parts of the scene, the U9N is actually pretty good. Let me turn this off. There we go. So now, okay, so let's be fair to ADS Pro. This is where ADS Pro off angle exacerbates the problem. Hoping you guys can see this. Yes, okay. So look at the Bravia 9, how good it looks. And look at the reference monitor. You just see it off angle, right? This is why you pay the big bucks. So I'm going to sit here and let my Sony fans and Sony TV, this is why it costs so much. Off angle. Look at the contrast. ADS Pro, with color, saturation, all that, it does it well. But now you suffer from a little bit of blooming when you're off angle, or quite a bit depending on your opinion. And that Bravia 9 this is why I say it's all software. Once you get above a certain number of dimming zones, it's all software. The U9N has probably 3 times as many dimming zones as the Bravia 9. But without the software, this is what happens. And maybe ADS Pro is a little bit of a contributor, maybe. But if you have see, I can't tell which is a problem. Is it the software or is it the ADS Pro? With the VA panel, when it's black and white and you don't have color saturation issues, its contrast is actually pretty phenomenal. And so, had to share that with you because you've got to be balanced, right? I love ADS Pro more often than not, but sometimes nothing is perfect, right? That's why you get OLED. OLED, those who are afraid of burning, I get it, but still, there are less compromises, in my opinion, with OLED. And I just want to show you what the compromises would be. Is everything back? There we go. Okay. Okay. So my exposure is really high, so you guys can see the level of shadow detail on both TVs. Now, what is it you normally see in this scene? So let me take it down to an exposure that I think is what should be seen in this scene. And I'm using the reference monitor to kind of double check a little bit more. Okay, I think that's about right. So most people would prefer the U9N actually, because you see more shadow detail, but the reference monitor is telling you, no, it's not as dark as the Bravia 9. The Bravia 9 could stand to be a little bit brighter, but it's not as bright as the U9N. It's what the reference monitor is, right? So maybe that'll do it. And again, the Bravia 9 was calibrated, so this is as good as it gets as far as shadow detail without affecting other things, right? So yeah. All right, let's see what question you guys got. 83-inch G4, Bravia 9, both under 6,000. I get the OLED. At the end of the day, if cost is no object, meaning you can afford the extra from OLED, get it. More often than not, it's going to look great. Now, in those scenes that I demonstrate, oh, the Bravia 9 has better color, this and that, 4,000 nit content, 3,000 nit content, it's content that you will never see outside of Jennifer Gala and her content. But if you're watching Netflix, not a big deal. We'll also do my favorite Witcher scene. Specular highlights are very similar. Let's look at the shadow detail because this is where TVs struggle most. Good job. U9N definitely worked on their shadow detail. Very well done. So in normal Netflix, not a big deal, more often than not, right? But I do see that the contrast in the Bravia 9 arguably might be a touch better, but it's side by side. That's why I notice it. Let me see how this scene is off angle. Not too bad. Okay. Yeah, it's a slightly over brightened across the board on the U9N, just slightly. YouTube makes it look a little bit brighter than it is, but most people won't find that offensive. Actually, you know what? Let me see if I change the brightness setting, not the brightness setting. We're not talking this, talking peak brightness. So let's see here. All right. Yes, low is accurate brightness. So for normal content watching, you have to put peak brightness on low. Doing that, ta-da! If you want accuracy, it's still slightly bright, even at a peak brightness of low, but it's a lot closer, and it doesn't affect the color. Wow, boy, this TV is super bright. Yeah, if you want, if you're watching normal content, right, whether it's SDR, HDR, whatever, play with the peak brightness on high. It is really bright. Maybe for sports, but on regular content, HDR, Netflix, you might want to take it to low if you want to match reference. But if you're in a bright room, it probably doesn't matter anyway. All right. U8N appears to outperform the U9N from what I am seeing. Better tone mapping. So the U8N is not, it doesn't have the headroom, but it has better tone mapping, right? So to use a car analogy, it's like the U9N has a V8, but terrible suspension. U8N, V6, perfect suspension. So it will be amazing handling up to 80 miles an hour. U9N, great handling up to 30, and above that starts to be like all over the road because it doesn't have the suspension to handle all that power. So the U9N has this headroom, but they need to tune their color and tone mapping. And I call it tone mapping. This shouldn't be tone mapping at all. But here we are. It's clipping, right? You guys saw the earlier scenes. So if you are shopping U8N prices, you're going to get great image quality 9.9 out of 10 times because that's everything we see. Only in Jennifer Gallo's content does the U9N then say, oh, I can get this bright, let me show off. But you're not going to see that on Netflix or whatever it is you're watching. So yeah, for regular TV watching, I recommend the U8N. Now, the only difference is possibly the audio. Oh, by the way, the U8N audio, one of the best out there, only matched and slightly exceeded by the Bravia 9. So the U8N also has the audio down. So now the U9N audio is probably slightly better because it's a larger TV, a little bit louder. But the U8N, it is a good balance of everything. Ah, what about motion? Oh, you know what? Let's check motion. Let's do that. You guys know my favorite motion scene, so let's do it right now. The only motion scene to challenge any TV I may have. Okay, I think that'll do it. Let's try this. Excellent motion on the Hisense. Now, the Sony, I think I turned off its motion interpolation. So if you guys can tell, it's stuttering a bit hard to my tastes. So let me give it the motion setting I normally set for Sony. This is what I like for Sony TVs. Motion flow I set to 1. Camera smoothness 1. Clearness I leave alone. Cinemotion on high. All right, let's try that now. And on the Hisense, this is my preferred motion setting. Can you see that now? All right, here we go. Motion, motion. So film is good. They did a good job of improving. So if you just want one word, put it on film. And in this scene, phenomenal job. They've definitely improved their motion if you just want to go straight to film. If you want to tune it, I think there's custom. There we go. I would normally have it at 3. I take blur up to 9. All right, let's see. My custom 3, let's see if it's better than their film. It'll be a little bit less soapy, but who knows? We'll find out. Oh, very nice indeed. And not soapy. The Bravia 9 is still stuttering a bit hard. I'm gonna have to, so quick follow-up after this live stream, I attempted a restart, which worked wonders. The settings took, so motion flow on 1 and smoothness on 1, everything on 1 as I had intended works fine. There is no more stutter. Also, a quick reminder, if you have a TV where you're doing the settings and it feels like the settings are not taking or not working, restart your TV and try it again. Back to the live stream. Maybe I have to restart my TV, right? To be fair, I have to restart my TV and everything will be magic. Okay. Let's conclude the U9N. The Hisense U9N, it is definitely a bright TV. This is the issue with the Hisense U9N, and this is why I'm going to stop right here to talk about it as I close out this first impression bed. So the brightest part of this scene is 1500 nits, just above 1500 nits. And it's not even super bright. And as you can see, the U9N is clipping. There's no detail, no color down there. And the Bravia 9 looks just like the reference monitor. Now the shadow detail is fine, right? If I increase the exposure, you guys can see that. Shadow detail looks great. The problem is the other end of the spectrum. And remember, I have the peak, I think the peak luminance down. Now this is a bright scene, so let me double check my settings. Peak brightness is on low, so there we go, it's on high now. Okay, I mean, it's brighter, didn't fix anything. Okay, so Hisense. This is the scene. Most of these scenes that are super bright like this needs to be addressed. Tone mapping, it should not be tone mapping, and yet it's clipping, right? Everything else about it within shadow detail up to 1,000 nits, more often than not, looks great. But that's not why we get the U9N. That's why we get the U8N, right? So if all I'm doing is watching shadow detail up to 1,000 nits, I'm getting the U8N. If you want me to get the U9N, and it's only for the audio, okay, audio is amazing. But if you want image quality, I really need to see you steal some engineers from Sony and study. When you have this much power under the hood, how do you tune the suspension, the choice of tires, right? The exhaust, everything. Everything comes into play. So the good news is maybe it's a firmware update from being awesome, but it is. So literally, I'm one of the first to receive the U9N. So I need to be fair to Hisense. As many of you saw with the TCL QM8 from 2 years ago, it was a mess, right? It was its first generation flagship mini-LED. It came out. I mean, they had to pull it off the shelf. Remember, at Best Buy, it's the firmware. It was just all over the place. But then a year later, maybe two, smooth, right? Or the original mini-LED from TCL, the 8 series. I had one of those. I had to return it. It was shutting off. It was terrible. But then 18 months later, smooth as silk. And so I expect, well, I hope it's the same with the U9N. This is its first firmware. So when I got the TV, I unboxed it. There was no firmware update waiting for me. So it is probably still its first beta firmware. I am hoping that it will get better over time. I will work closely with Hisense to tell them what the issues are, but it's obvious. You guys can see it. Color desaturation and tone mapping issues above 1,000 nits. Sometimes below 1,000 nits, there were issues. But the color is great out of the box. I think they nailed it. If anything, like right here, you can see, oh, and the uniformity is great too. I forgot to mention that. So I mean, it has the hardware. It's just the software is missing, and it pains me because there's so much potential here. This could have been a Bravia 9 killer, not like the poor man's Bravia 9. This has the hardware, but it just didn't have the chops. So anyway, let's get to your questions. We're out of here. There we go. Oh, ADS Pro. Off angle, you guys how awesome it was. Stick with ADS Pro more often than not. That is a great panel. And BOE will have a next generation ADS Pro coming out next year. And TCL, CSOT will have a next generation VA panel that I'm hoping Sony will use on their future TVs as well. So LCD continues to improve. Yay. Oh, look, hey, Leo. Thank you for that super chat. Show black sparkle hat, FOMO. Sparkle hat, U9N, nails it. Easily a match, almost a match for the reference monitor. And how bright is that hat, you ask? It is only 10 nits. And so what does that tell you, my friends? Oh, you know what? I have to show you off angle, the cost. That's awesome color saturation. But the blooming is definitely more visible. And I have to get my exposure up higher so you guys can see that. I think you guys can see it now. Okay, so I hope you guys see the difference in blooming. At the very top right here, there's a touch more blooming here, and there's less here. I mean, it's still on the Sony, just not as much as the U9N. And that would be the disadvantage of ADS Pro, right? Is that what people say is off angle? But then you get color off angle. As you can see, color saturation is preserved a little bit. And blooming, can you try local dimming on medium? Sure. Least I can do for you guys. local dimming on medium. Oh, there it is. So it is on medium now. Let me see if that helps. And you know what? Let me put it back up again. I know it's super bright, but I'll toggle it down. Okay, so here we go. That's medium. That's low, medium, high. High is the best. So high, I can see eliminates, it gives you the best black levels, which is normally the case, right? Medium just makes it worse. Medium, you lose contrast too. You can see that? Contrast is lost in medium. You got to keep it on high. So it's still the best for the Hisense U9N. All right, just leave it there. I'll take the exposure down a bit. Not now, my camera is not doing well at that exposure. Okay, so this kind of demonstrates off angle what ADS Pro can do for you. And I'm going to move it on angle slowly so you can see. There we go. Okay, we're going to wrap this up. The BFI is causing flicker in your camera. Yeah, you know what? That probably is it, huh? Do I still have BFI? Did I leave it on? Thank you for that. I'm like, I don't normally have to deal with flicker. Yeah. You guys are awesome. It's like having my own engineering team. There we go. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. I go, why is it flickering? It wasn't flickering before. Okay. But ultimately, the U9N, it's still, to me, an unfinished product right now. Given that its performance is more similar to the U7N in terms of its polish, U8N is a more polished, finished product. So if you're thinking 85-inch Hisense, get the U8N right now. It's a better deal. And if you want slightly brighter, the QM8 does a better job tone mapping that brightness than the U9N does at this time. And yeah, and if you could afford the Bravia 9, you guys saw what it can do. So there's that as well. Oh, if Sony had ADS Pro, what could happen?
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.